Welcome to the Child First webinar, examining children's collaboration in the youth justice system. This webinar is designed to provide relevant youth justice professionals with information of how to facilitate the implementation of Child First justice in practice in organisations across the youth justice system.
I think we are off, everybody. It's slightly strange, isn't it, when we all have our cameras off and we can't see each other. But I can see that there's an extraordinary number of people here today, and I just really want to spend a few minutes welcoming you all. My name's Louise Shorter. I'm a member of the board of the Youth Justice Board, and I'm the board lead for Child First. And it's my real pleasure to welcome you all here today. It shows great convening powers of the YJB to be able to bring so many people from across the sector together. So I'm going to start off with a couple of housekeeping sort of points and then a little tiny bit on Child First, but I shall leave the expertise to the experts and then give you a sort of a very big broad overview of what we are looking forward to today. So in terms of the housekeeping, as you are all doing brilliantly well already, if we can just keep our cameras and mics off, please, during the presentation. We'll have them on during the Q&A. And there'll be some times when you can participate throughout the session. But as a general rule, if you could keep your cameras and mics off, that will mean we can all concentrate on the stuff that we're going to learn. We are going to have a Slido, as you can see in the Q&A function on the side there of Teams. You will see that there's a Slido function where you can put questions in, or you can use the Q&A bit of Teams itself if you want to put questions in there. We've got so many people from across the sector here today. It really is fantastic to see that we have colleagues from youth justice services, from policing, from the secure estate, from the courts, from children's social care, from education, health, academics, probation, and across the voluntary sector. And you are all really very welcome. And we are really very pleased that you're spending this time with us today to get some really sort of practical hands-on sort of learning about how we can make Child First the most effective that we possibly can. You all know Child First is the framework for what works best with children who are in trouble. It's not our theory at the YJB, it's based on the latest research and it's the evidence, and it's designed to keep communities safe by helping children to achieve their very best outcomes and live their best lives and prevent offending. And that's what we're all here and committed to do. So that's why that framework, that evidence-based framework of Child First is the vision that we have at the Youth Justice Board for a Child First youth justice system. And that's the guiding principle within the youth justice sector. And that's what we're going to really learn about today, I think, is the sort of the practical hands-on that this very latest research has been able to bring out, which is, really interesting and it will be a very practical use, I think, to us all. This latest research that we're going to learn about, as Neil just mentioned, is really focusing on tenet 3. When I started at the Youth Justice Board and we were sort of working through how do we bring these different tenets down to things which are more sort of memorable and easier for people to really be able to get their heads around. It's quite a it's a complex sort of set of tenets. You know full well that the tenet in full is encouraging participation and engagement and wider social inclusion. And all of that comes through a really meaningful collaboration with children and their carers. And so I think the research that we're learning about today is how we do that. How do we make this collaboration really meaningful? So we're going to learn about some really creative and participatory approaches that the researchers have used, which are really based on building relationships with children and giving them an opportunity to use their voices. So enough from me. I'm going to sit back now and hand over to Professor Neil Hazel. There will be opportunities for you to contribute at various stages to the presentation, but for now I'll hand over to Neil Hazel. Neil.
Thanks very much, Louise. So I'm Neil Hazel, I'm Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Salford. I was chair of the advisory board for this particular project and also a Youth Justice Board veteran, I suppose. the way to put it. But I don't have a substantive role today. I'm simply facilitating some fantastic research discussion involving you guys, everybody, but first and foremost, a great research team, a collaboration between the University of Loughborough and Aberystwyth. We've got Steve Case, Kathy Hampson, Andrea Nisbet, brilliant team. Have come up with some really insightful findings in relation to putting tenet 3 into practice. And all I really want to say in introduction to that is just the way the day is going to go. So, well, these 2 hours, and it's going to fly by. First of all, we're going to hear from Steve, from Kathy, and Andrea about the projects, a little bit about the methodology. I know they won't talk a lot about that, but you have to, because we're researchers. We have to mention the methods bit in order to be legit. Then we get on to talk about the findings, which is a bit that everybody wants to know about. And then after that, there's going to be a 20-minute question and answer session, and people can put their questions as they're going along into Slido or into the Q&A. Then after that, we're going to focus on the recommendations. Kathy's coming back in and going to talk about the particular recommendations for policy and practice. And after those are introduced, just very briefly for 5 minutes, then we get into the meat, which is a discussion from you guys where we want to hear your ideas on putting these recommendations into practice. Now, those questions for practice were sent out in advance to you. You know what they are, but just to recap now, so you'll be thinking about these as the presentation is going on. The 3 questions are: if you incorporate the research findings into your practice agency, how could you do this? So thinking about your context, how could you implement them? 2, what do you think are going to be the enablers, things that are really going to enable you to do that, going to push that on, or the barriers to implementing these sort of recommendations and findings into your practice? And then what support do you think you'd need, whether that's from the YJB, whether that's from research, whether that's from other agencies? What support you need to implement the findings and to facilitate child first practice more widely? But as you know, we're focusing on the collaborating with children, the 3rd element today. So after that, we'll hear back from Louise from the YJB officially on their response. And then I'll just summarize right at the end. If anybody it can stay to hear that last 5 minutes, then I'll try and summarize and move us forward. So first off, then, we're going to go to hear an introduction about the project and context from Steve, Professor Steve Case from the University of Loughborough. Now, it's interesting because Steve's had an interesting journey. For years and years, he was quite rightly a critic of the YJB and the critic of the risk-focused approach that the YJB and the sector had, and has really sort of gone on a journey with us to now look at how you actually implement a proper evidence-informed approach that's child first. But that wasn't always the case. In fact, when I first joined the YJB, I was given a huge document on how to deal with Steve, called Case Management Guidance. But that's been revised now in line with child first. So and Steve is on board. So over to you, Steve. Okay, we can't hear you, Steve, or at least I can't hear you.
It's because I haven't put my mic on.
That would be good.
Okay. Thanks for the invite, and thanks to everybody for coming. My part will be brief. I'm going to talk about the background, the context to this research, and I'm also going to talk about the methodology, actually. So we've flipped the agenda a little bit, which is more important than Neil gave it credit for. The context of this study is really that following kind of quite a bit of research around evidencing child first, following the research evidence-based report that myself and Anne Browning put together in 2021, and also a project called the Strategy Implementation Project in 2021, both of which are available on the Child First Justice website of Loughborough University. We kind of decided that one of the key challenges facing Child First in the sector is what it looks like in practice. It's operationalizing, implementing, realizing Child First in practice, because it's strategically very well embedded now. It has a long-standing research evidence base internationally, at least its key tenets do, and the model as a whole does, and it's increasingly being realised as a model in pockets of practice all over England and Wales. But there is still a challenge that we all face around how to do it, what it looks like in practice, and how it can be done, Child First, in the most effective way possible. And the research team, myself and Andrew and Kathy and others like Neil, had particular interest in the third tenet, which is collaboration with children, participation, engagement, social inclusion. What that actually looks like in practice, and to try to fill a gap. It's not a vacuum, because there are pockets of really strong research around participation and engagement with children in youth justice contexts, from Hannah Smithson and Sean Creaney and Samantha Burns and Marie Day and people like that. But there hasn't been, we didn't think anyway, there hadn't been a really detailed examination of what children understand by collaboration rather than participation, collaboration per se, in youth justice context, what it looks like for them, how it is perceived as effective or ineffective, and what practitioners can do to make collaborative practice more effective with children, make it more child-centric, make it more aligned with the Child First tenets. So we put together a proposal which was very kindly funded by the Nuffield Foundation, and very kindly supported, actually, the proposal by some of those colleagues I talked about, Neil and Hannah, people like that, give us a lot of guidance about what we should be doing. And we identified a series of question themes, research questions, that we really wanted to explore with children in youth justice contexts around collaboration, around Tenet 3. What do they understand by collaboration? What do children, rather than adults, rather than practitioners, another neglected stakeholder group, I suppose, in the whole process of developing this strategy, what do children understand should be the objectives of collaborative practice in the youth justice system? What do they see as effective and ineffective collaboration practice? And then, with those three research questions in mind, what do children think about how collaboration practice could be improved? So the purpose here was not just to focus down on Tenet 3, but it was to be child-centric. It was to address this adult-focused, adult-dominated, adult-centric nature of research and policy and practice development that's been a kind of a legacy since Crime and Disorder Act, I suppose, and further on. So, as we say here, we wanted to access the genuine thoughts, voices of justice-involved children, rather than predominantly adult perspectives. We wanted the research process and the research findings to be genuinely child-centric, child-focused, child-friendly, child-first. And we wanted to facilitate these children to communicate in ways which are meaningful to them, and reduce these kind of power inequalities that we have in research and practice contexts around the relationships that professionals have with children. So that's where it's come from. Next. So what we decided to do was kind of twofold. Obviously, this piece of research is going to be participatory, to be properly meaningful, to be properly collaborative as a journey, as a research journey, and properly child-centric, legitimately child-centric, it had to be participatory. So first of all, we convened a project reference group in a youth justice service in the Midlands, and ran regular sessions with that project reference group of children involved with that youth justice service, where we used creative, what we thought child-centric, innovative, neglected research methodologies, such as those set out there, to try to elicit their perspectives on our research questions, how we'd frame the research questions, how we should interrogate those research questions, the language that we should use, the methodologies that we should employ in our field work portion of the research. And we also talked to the project reference group about how to interpret our findings. So this process, these regular sessions ran throughout the entire 2 years of the project. So the purpose here was to meaningfully involve children in all aspects of the research process, not just on all aspects of their youth justice journey. So for that reason, I think that, yes, we want to jump past the methodology and we have to kind of jump through these hoops and tell you what we did. But I really think that this methodology is integral to the learning on this project. We learned a lot of lessons around participatory research with children in the youth justice system, as much as we did about collaboration in practice with these children. And we learned a lot of these lessons through the project reference group. So it was about understanding, interpreting, developing the research questions. It was about delivering the research. It was about interpreting our findings and making conclusions and recommendations, and negotiating and talking about these with children in the project reference group, using creative child-centric methodologies. And then the main fieldwork portion of our research was a series of what we called system journey interviews, where we talked, sometimes on multiple occasions, with a sample of children situated at various stages of the youth justice process, from diversion into various stages of community disposal, custody, resettlement space, in a sample of 3 youth justice services and 3 institutions from the secure estate, 2 YOIs and 1 secure children's home, where we interviewed them around these questions and around collaboration, and assessed their youth justice journeys, their experiences, their perspectives, their views, their thoughts and feelings, in these kind of child-centric interviews. Where possible, in the sample we had a geographical spread. It wasn't representative, of course it wasn't, but we had a geographical spread: England, Wales, North, South, Midlands. We had, as I said, a spread of children at different stages of the youth justice process, of the youth justice system. We had a spread of ethnicity, gender, neurodiversity, etc. As far as possible. All of this will be set out in more detail in the full report, which is due in a month's time, and we will circulate to all interested parties. And so that is what we did, why we did it, how we did it, and we want to get to the real meat of this, which is the findings. So I'll shut up.
Okay, I think this bit is down to me. So I will talk about the first couple of research questions that we looked at. So just to be clear about the fact that we wanted to look at children across the whole range of youth justice experience, so that we could get to understand what what were the themes coming up from all of these children, rather than pockets of children at different stages. We wanted to get much more of an overview of what children thought. So our first research question was about understanding, and what do children understand collaboration to mean? So our overarching sort of finding really was about asking children for their opinions and responding appropriately, but that meant certain things. So we've got a bit of a process here, and I think one of the things that we found was that although there are obviously some pockets of really good collaborative practice in many of the settings that we were looking at, a lot of them did some of them, but not all of them. And so there were stages and bits missing that left it as an incomplete sort of loop of collaboration, really. So children really felt the absence of some of these stages. So we sort of broke it down into different bits, and some of them may seem somewhat obvious, as in asking children to begin with, but actually, it's sometimes easy to miss some of these stages, and so children valued being asked what they thought. So we needed to ask them to begin with in order to find out what they thought. But then the next stage to that is to listen to them and hear them and really reflect back that they have been heard. And so if somebody feels that they've been heard, like the quote that we've got there, well, I'm not going to go through the quotes, they're just to illustrate the points that we've drawn out, so you can read them as I speak. So the boy really is reflecting that he feels listened to and he feels heard. And so a number of markers to that, obviously, is about not being cut off, is about letting someone speak, and is about really, noting down what someone says. So asking children, then listening to them and hearing what they say. And then the next stage is about respecting children's views. So that's a number of things fit into that umbrella term of respecting children's views, really. So it is the way in which that's received. So the way in which somebody hears and listens. Are they valuing that child and what they're saying? But are they also then doing something about it? So it's about having respect for what is said and that inputting into what then happens in some way. So whether we're talking about what's happening for an individual child, or whether we're talking about what's happening more widely within the whole of a youth justice service, if a child is asked for their opinion, they're listened to and they're respected, and their view then goes into some kind of process that changes what then happens, then they will see the point of the collaboration in the first place. And I think one of the things that we found was there were these sort of black holes in some of the stages, which meant they may have been asked, but actually they couldn't quite see what had happened to that. It didn't get reflected into anything that then happened. Or they didn't feel that the person listening to them was actually listening to them, and therefore it seemed to stop there. So there's a lot of these things that can really stop collaboration in its tracks, really, by not taking the whole kind of process seriously enough. And so the last bit is then something about information. And again, there's two parts to this as well. Children obviously need to be fully informed in order to be able to offer their opinion, offer their what their point of view, and so if they need to be fully informed as to what is what this sort of situation is, what they're being asked about, in a way that they can understand. But also there is the second part of that is about a feedback loop. And I think sometimes this seemed to be what children were saying just didn't happen. So, and I think we found this probably more often in custody than in community, that children may be asked about their opinions. They may have been clear about what they wanted, and it was taken away, but then they had no idea why it didn't happen, or why there was nothing that changed as a result of it. So it's, can this make a difference to what happens? But if not, has it been fed back to the child? Why not? Because to not do that then builds frustration for the collaboration process, and means that they then don't value it because they don't see it as being as making any change, as their voice actually creating a difference in the process for them, in the process of youth justice more generally. And we have different levels of children wanting to be involved in different bits. Some wanted to be involved at quite a high level in terms of strategy, others were more interested in being involved in decision making about their own plans. But I think that this really runs throughout all of it and applies to all of it as well. So we need to, in order to according to the children, their understanding what collaboration is, we need to do all of those 4 things. So, sorry, Andrea, that now takes us on to research question 2, because we picked apart this into different bits. So research question 2 then really drills into, what do children see as the point of all this, of the objective of the whole exercise of being involved in a collaborative process. And as we know, the Child First guidance said that all work needs to be part of a collaborative process. So what do children see as these objectives? Because everything that we see in policy, it largely comes down to what adults see as being the objectives. So what our overarching finding from this is that basically children's objective in all of this is their own life goals. They want to be able to achieve and to do what they want to do in order to get on with their life and move on, and to not be part of a criminal system, to be honest, anymore. So their own life goals were really, really important to all of this. And therefore, if their own life goals weren't included in, weren't sort of the objective of the collaboration process, they couldn't see any point in it, and they didn't then value what was happening, and they felt it was almost exacerbating the ignoring of what they thought. So this involves then a number of different aspects of asking children what they want to achieve in life. And again, that, you know, some of this is reflected in the updated case management guidance and in the Child First strategy document. So it's about, you know, where do they want to be? What do they want to do? And therefore, part 2, hear and support what their aspirations are, because it should be all based about what they want to do. Because if they want to achieve a certain aim, be in a certain place, if what we're trying to do is to get them to be somewhere else that doesn't make sense to them, then that's not something they're going to want to particularly buy into. So it's about how to then make sure that their aspirations are supported. And this again is reflected in some of the constructive resettlement stuff that Neil's done, and the provision of fresh air. It really echoes some of this stuff that really children actually are thinking this as well. Children value that approach, which I think is helpful, because it means they're more likely to buy into it if they value it. We need to be forward focused, and so in terms of collaboration for planning, it's how can we help them to move on with their lives? How can we help them to look forward, see a future for themselves that is positive and pro-social, and help them then to move on and to be able to put this behind them. You know, a lot of the children, that was their focus, actually, to put all this behind them. They didn't want to be involved in this, so let's do something that helps them to be in a much better place after their involvement. But children really did recognise the help that they received from youth offending teams. We use the term YOP, but we have changed that in a report to Youth Justice Services, because obviously that is now the term that is the preferred term, and rightly so. So children were really actually quite appreciative of the help that was given to them that was related to where they wanted to go and how they wanted to build their lives. When it related to that, they really saw it, they really appreciated it, and they could see the value in that. So their objective of this whole exercise is help me to move on, help me to live a life where I'm going to achieve stuff, where I'm going to be successful. So I'll leave that to Andrea then to move on to research question 3.
Hi everybody, can you see and hear me? Okay. Sorry about that. I can't see myself on the screen, so I'm just checking that I can that you can all see and hear me. I'm Andrea Nisbet, and I'm the research associate for the project. I'm thrilled to be here today to share these findings with you. It's been such a great project to work on, a privilege to speak to all these young people that I spoke to, both in the community and in custodial settings. So I'm here today to speak to you about question 3, which builds on the findings that Kathy has just spoken to you about. So research question 3 was all about effective collaboration. And how do children perceive effective collaboration? What does it mean to them? What does that look like in practice for children? So basically, the 3 things that you can see on the screen. So it's about building relationships. Children recognise that if they had a good relationship with their worker or their practitioner, that enabled them to feel comfortable and able to speak about their feelings. If they didn't have that particular relationship with the worker, it didn't really facilitate them to have that collaborative relationship. So building relationships with children was really important. That came from this research from a children's perspective on what effective collaboration is. So that first one then, so positive relationships. And then the other second theme that came from the findings was about power dynamics. This was across all services, mainly in court, police, and some of the custodial settings that I visited. But children were really aware of power dynamics. And then the third one was about working together, which builds on some of the things that Kathy said. So if I go back to the first one then, in terms of building relationships with children, professionals building relationships with children, it was overwhelmingly clear from what children were saying that they wanted professionals to care what happened to them and care about them. And they were really perceptive on this one, that they could tell that if people were just, doing it as part of their job, and I know we all need our jobs, but children, from their point of view, really wanted those professionals to care about them. So in terms of some of the quotes here, I will read some of them out because I think some of them are really powerful, and I think it's really good to hear the child's voice in this. So in terms of that first one, this boy was talking about his practitioner, makes me feel as if he's really here for me, to benefit me. He sees other people that doesn't actually care, but he's not like that. He's not doing it just because of his job. So I think that's really important there. So in terms of the second one then, about power dynamics, this was about children's perceptions, actually thinking that adults use their power on purpose. So they actually use that position of power. So children spoke about professionals using their power. So police officers, when they were getting arrested, in court situations, and again, some of the custodial sessions, they felt as if there was this dominant power play game going on. But then the other aspect of this was environments, and in how environments can actually help with children and their collaboration. So this quote here, I think, is really powerful, from this child who was saying that the court environment was so stressful and everyone was looking at him, eyes from all directions, and it made him feel really uncomfortable. And he went on to tell me that, he just couldn't speak because he just felt that stressed and that uncomfortable with this situation. So we're trying to encourage collaboration with children. The power dynamics and the environments are really important for facilitating children's engagement with what's happening to them. So in terms of environments, children were saying that they wanted a friendly, welcoming environment. Kids used the words such as chilled and calm, that they wanted that comfortable atmosphere around them. That was another thing that children spoke about, was the atmosphere. That one of the institutions that I went into, as soon as I went into, I could feel the negativity and children not being encouraged to speak and engage with their workers. And children, expressed it to me when I interviewed them. So I think that that's really a really important part of facilitating children's engagement and collaboration in matters that impact them. And then this final point about interventions and support being developed together links into what Kathy was saying originally about the objectives of collaboration, and those interventions and support plans being built together, co-created with children with their support. As this is a very positive quote from a child saying, I definitely had a say in what went into my plan. We did it 100%. I was definitely telling them what I wanted to do and what I thought I needed support about. So that was really positive from this child that I spoke to. But in other situations, that just wasn't the case. Children said that, they felt as if, well, quite a lot of children that I spoke to couldn't even remember having any intervention or really talk about what kind of support, because it wasn't the support and goals that they wanted to achieve in life themselves. So they see effective collaboration as having practitioners that actually care about them, and then actually in environments and in ways which empower children to be able to speak, so they're not stressed and too scared to do that. So that was mainly what we found out about effective collaboration. I'm just trying to move the slide on to the final slide, the final question then, not the final slide, the final question that we looked at. So this was really, so this was about effective, developing effective practice. So what improvements and developments could take place in terms of the collaboration with children in the youth justice system right across the system. So this built on what children spoke about as ineffective practice, and they also spoke about their own ideas about how they thought things could be improved. So in terms of what I've just been speaking about on the previous slide was about power dynamics, and really how we need to recognise and power dynamics and counteract them wherever possible, because it's really a barrier towards that collaboration with children. And again, as you can see, that first quote there is about a child who was being arrested by police, and he said that the police was asking him, but he could see that the police weren't really listening. He felt that they had already made up their minds about what they were going to do. And he felt as if his voice just wasn't worth anything. And as that quote also sort of points to, is in terms of that stigmatization and labeling of children as well. So the second point there was about children should be involved in decision making at all levels, which Kathy again moving on from what Kathy said as well. So this was at a strategic level and practice level. So at the strategic level, the things that children spoke about was about being involved in planning. So plans that could include the annual youth justice plan, but any plans that were to do that might have an impact on them. They felt as if it would be good to have their voice heard in that and actually listened to, and actually be clear about how their voice was listened to and what impact it had on those decisions being made at that strategic level. The other idea that children spoke about at strategic level was being involved in recruitment panels. And this kind of linked back to that previous slide about positive relationships and professionals who care. So this was about in terms of, so if they were actually involved in recruiting staff, the right staff would be recruited. And that linking into that caring theme as well. On a practice level, this again was about their plans and the support and the interventions, working with those together, and those plans, as Kathy stated, to be not about adult-centric tasks that adults might think will be good for children, but actually this theme of asking children their opinion about what they would like to do as part of the practice and the work they're going to be doing with professionals. So it should be based on their self aspirations and their goals in life, and they should be involved in those sessions, in those decisions at a practice level. And then moving on to that second one about recruiting, quite a strong thing that came out was a couple of children had been part of a peer mentoring scheme, and they thought this was really, really positive. They really could relate to this because of the peer mentors actually having the same kind of experiences as they had themselves. So they thought this would be a really good idea to actually implement more of this in practice. It would actually support them to collaborate and engage in interventions that support that they would find helpful because of the experiences that those people had had themselves. And then the final point on this slide is about inconsistencies across the youth justice system need to be addressed. And as I think we've said throughout this presentation about the findings from our 4 questions, it's an inconsistent picture across out there from a children's perspective. So mainly we had some really positive examples from youth justice services about how children are involved in their planning and in decision making about them. Custody was a mixed bag. There was a really positive custodial setting that I visited. The other 2 not so positive for children. So there's a lot more that custodial settings can do to support children to become involved in decisions about themselves. And then police courts and children's social care were very negative. There's a lot of developments that I think that this research can help support in those settings. So that's the police settings, courts and social workers. Children weren't so positive about those settings at all. Anyway, that's from our perspective of the findings. I'm going to move on now to the next slide, which is from our project reference group. So our project reference group, as part of their work that they did with us, we asked them about how they wanted to disseminate the findings from this research, and they were really interested in doing a wrap. So what they did is they looked at the quotes from the young people from the participation sample, and then they mixed them with some of their own views, and they came up with a wrap, which was great for me because I got to visit this lovely recording studio, and I would like you to listen to the rap now.
Trends. If you're gonna arrest me, then speak with respect. That's the 5-0, the want us under arrest. They got power on us because they're cops. They're aggressive and corrupt. They ignore us in the station, not giving us a right, man. It's not fair, nothing's gonna change. The lads locked up, they need to get them out. Free the lads of themselves.
Stop getting in trouble, join the army, get a car and run a flat. That's what I wanna do, that's the plan. I want to get my apprenticeship as important to me. I wanna get my apprenticeship as important to me. They are trying to help me with getting a job so I can earn some money, earn some cash, earn some money, earn some cash. So I can fly out with my fam.
I thought it was shit, but it turns out it's lit. I like to play pool and listen to music. It keeps me busy and out of my pad. We get the opportunity to say how we feel, but nothing gets done, nothing changes. They need to listen to take it on board. And what we're saying, you're just banged up. Yeah, you're just banged up.
Shout out to the yacht, they tryna get me a job to earn some peace. I thought they was joking, chatting to me, but it really helped me to live in peace. They always ask me what I think about stuff, encourage me to give views and stuff. They speak on me on a level, they don't chat to me like I'm a rebel. They don't chat to me like I'm a rebel.
If you're gonna arrest me, then speak with respect. That's the 5-0, the want us under arrest. They got power on us because they're cops. They're aggressive and corrupt. They ignore us in the station, not giving us a right, man. It's not fair, nothing's gonna change. The lads locked up, they need to get them out. Free the lads of themselves.
Hey.
Free the lads, yeah?
Get me.
Free the lads, cause we're God.
Chat to the YOT.
Shout out YOT and
no cap.
Trends. Trends.
So that was our wrap that the young people from the PRG put together. That's my bit. Over to Steve, is it now? No? Neil.
I think it's over to me. So I think we're on to the first participatory part of today. So thanks very much. Really interesting. I'm going to resist the temptation to try and summarize things now, because I do have the 5 minutes at the end to do that, and we've so much more to happen now. So for the next period, we're going to turn to the questions that people have put in the Q&A. But also feel free to put your hand up as well, and we can come to you if you'd rather be a live questioner. But the best way to get chosen is by putting your questions in Q&A or otherwise. So the first question I want to look at, which is specifically on this topic, comes from Anne-Marie Day, another great researcher, and she's related some of what's been said here to participatory practice approaches that have been championed and designed by researchers over a period of time, in particular at MMU, which is where Anne-Marie Day is, but also, of course, we've got Sean Creaney and others who have looked at ways to increase the participation of children in youth justice practice. And she asks, how's it similar to that? How's it relate to that work? So over to you guys. How do you think it relates to that kind of wider context that we have of research on participation?
I'll take this to begin with, and then we'll see whether anyone else has got anything to add. And I know that Andrea has worked with that project as well, so she's got some experience of both, if you like, which is helpful. I think to begin with, we are talking about collaboration, and the important thing about the terminology is that we feel it's a wider term than participation. Participation is a kind of a specific part of collaboration, and we've tried to, as you'll see when you see the report, we've tried to keep our terminology very clear and to the idea of collaboration, having defined that. And I did a piece with Sean Creaney and Sam Burns, and we looked at diving a little bit more into the definition of what we're talking about here, and because there's so much different terminology in this field, in this little area, that we wanted to be really clear about what does it all mean. And so we've really sort of taken and run with this idea of collaboration as being a bit of an umbrella term, which includes participation as part of it. And so, of course, a lot of the work that's been done at MMU is really sort of pushed the field in terms of participation, both in practice and in research. I think one of the things we did differently in research was that we wanted to help the children to express themselves in a way that felt natural to them. Not by teaching them how to do something, so getting an artist in and teaching them how to do graffiti art, for example, but in using the kind of things that they enjoy doing and wanted to do and felt that they could express themselves in, and running with that, with them leading us in that. So it was a little bit of a different approach than what we've sort of seen before, and certainly from the Manchester project. It's just a different way of doing it, and is rather, I'm not saying it's better, it's just different. But that's why we ended up with the rap, actually, because a lot of the children who we were working with in the small group we were working with were really into a rap, but they were actually brilliant at working through lyrics, and we got them to use the words of our participants, which they just sort of altered a little bit, adding some of their own ideas into, and created this amalgam, which was the rap, which expressed what they felt they wanted to say, but definitely using their skills. And I think that we also wanted to, in terms of looking at this from a child's point of view, what do children think about this attempt by adults to collaborate with them? How does that feel? How is that received? And we haven't particularly sort of seen so much on that, looking in the youth justice sphere at all levels and in all places, and looking wider than yachts, because this is not just about youth justice services. This is about all agencies within the youth justice space. And where are the places where that's been not really felt very much, or where has it been problematic in the way it's been attempted, or we found those different nuances in the different areas and the different places. Andrew, I don't know if you've got anything to add to that from your better knowledge of that project.
Steve, did you want to go first, or?
I just wanted to say, while I thought of it, to reiterate, I obviously agree with what Kathy said, that the relationship here with the work of Manchester Met is complementary, isn't it? Really, we don't own this space. It complements one of the same as it's complementary to the work of Sean Creaney and Sam Burns, and I say again, Manchester Met, and particularly Hannah Smithson, were really generous with their time in actually looking at the original proposal and giving some really valuable insight into how we could craft this such that it would be complementary, but distinctive enough in its own right to get funded. So that's sort of by way of answering the question in a little way, and also saying thanks again to Hannah for her input.
I'd just like to say a few words. As Kathy mentioned, I've worked for both. I think they're both brilliant pieces of research. And I think from my understanding of what that was done with the PYP, the participatory framework that the Manchester Centre of Youth Studies developed as part of their research, and what we've done, I think there's differences in the research. I definitely learned from the Manchester project, because that's where I worked previously, so that was massively helpful to me for this project. But the questions, I think, were developed very much with the children of the PRG. The PRG was, again, a different kind of methodology, participatory methodology that we used as part of this project. So I think that was slightly different in the way that we did that, the way that we explored those creative activities. As Kathy said, I do know that the Manchester project also, children there also did a rap, but that was because obviously the young children, so young people, they love rap music and drill music, so that's what they wanted to do as part of that project, and that's what they wanted to do as part of this project as well. So I know that there are similarities as well. I think in terms of the findings of this project, because of the questions covering collaboration, which is, as Kathy's explained, slightly different way of understanding that engagement and involvement of children, I think our findings are different, and you'll see that when they come out in detail in our report, and hopefully some of the findings that we've shared with you today, you'll be able to see those differences. Is that okay?
Okay, thanks, guys. So there's a question from Carmen Lambert-Singer about police wearing body-worn cameras, and how and we know, of course, there's a lot of work being done at the moment on trying to introduce more child first policing as opposed to just child-centered policing, and the question from Carmen was about whether considered asking for body-worn cameras in order to find good and bad examples of how cops talk to the police. So, and I think this is about widening out the different findings that you've had in relation sort of collaboration and working together and relationships and power, because power was mentioned, of course, in relation to the police in the rap and others. What about sort of talking to kids, or seeing that interaction in relation to body-worn cameras?
Well, do you want to do that project with us, Neil? That's next, is it?
I've already got a bid into Nuffield. Yes,
Yeah.
no, right, yes. That sounds good to me.
You know better than anybody about the importance of moving Child First into the police space, and with a focus on collaboration and child-centric research and child-centric language and interactions and all those things that are coming out of this project. That would be a really nice, neat and logical follow-up piece, just as it would if you did something in courts, if you did something for the youth custody service. So yeah, but it wasn't something that we were specifically focused on here. Research should be done.
There was a point made in the presentation about including children in writing youth justice plans and the kind of the more strategic side of things. And there's a note in the chat from Birmingham Youth Justice Service about how children are used in recruitment process and how children can sort of get involved in the work of the Youth Justice Service, not just about their particular case, but more generally. So that's really encouraging.
When Child First was invented in Wales as Children First Offender Second by Haynes and Drakeford, and the work at in Swansea, the Swansea yacht manager, the great Eddie Isles, was interviewed by children to get his job. The Children's Commissioner in Wales was interviewed by children, as was Keith Towler, who's on the YJB as a Children's Commissioner. So yeah, of course.
I was just going to add to that. Some of the children that I spoke to, not all of them, and I think this is in terms of this part of collaboration is actually asking children, because some of the children that I spoke to wouldn't have wanted to get involved at that strategic level, but some of them that I spoke to were really keen to be involved in that strategic level, business plans and recruitment, especially that link, as I mentioned when I was doing the presentation on that, in terms of being able to I've lost my train of thought. Get involved in the questions for that recruitment process, but also in fact so they can actually see that some of the candidates care. They care about their practice. That was really clearly linked, that they wanted to be involved so that the right people could be recruited.
Okay, so there's a methods question here. So very excited about this. A methods question, essentially about generalization of interpretive research, but let's see, it's from Jade Goodwin, who asked, why are the numbers of children spoken to so small in comparison with the number of children within the justice services? How did you have a specific criteria for selecting participants? So anybody want to go into that about sort of generalization of qualitative interpretive research?
Well, yeah. So we wanted to do a very qualitative piece of work because we were looking at what children think, and we needed to really get to the bottom of what children think. And I don't think you can do that with a survey. I don't think you can do that in any quantitative way, because it doesn't really lend itself to being something that children will easily be able to kind of to complete, and I don't think you can dig into what's really going on for children. So it was always going to be a very qualitative piece of work, and that naturally then limits you to the number of children you can speak to. And so we wanted to speak to as many as we could from different sort of bits of the system, those at portion level, those with court orders, those from custody, and those in custody, and get enough to be able to form an understanding of what children were saying. And the themes that we drew out were themes that were really across the board. And so while of course you've got to be very careful about generalizing out when you've got a small cohort of children and you've got a very large kind of potential population, I think that because of the amount of commonality in what was coming out, we can be confident that there were some themes coming out that would be relevant to a good number of children and reflect what a good number of them seem to be feeling and seem to be thinking. And it's a limitation of qualitative research, isn't it? And it's one of those things, how to balance the depth and the breadth, and trying to get enough while giving yourself enough time to go into enough depth. It's one of those.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, with qualitative research, you get the richness and the depth of understanding to the questions. As Kathy said, you'd never get this depth and richness of data from a quantitative survey, and that's not what we were aiming to do. By using qualitative data, you get that far more detailed, nuanced understanding of what children are actually saying. Understandably, generalising any kind of research can be problematic, whether that be qualitative or quantitative. So although it is a slight limitation to qualitative research, it by no means makes our findings any less valid.
I don't think anybody's trying to say that the findings are representative in a statistical way, but you can have a single case study, and if that single case study reveals something that explains what's going on, then that's incredibly powerful, as I think some of the findings from this research is. Now we've got a couple of people, Jordan from the YJB and Sam Burns, has asked questions about the project reference group in particular, and asking about they're really both interested in asking about how you manage the power dynamics within the project reference group, in particular the power dynamics between older and younger children, whether you used incentives. They're sort of asking for tips really about how you run that. So if you can give away your sort of professional secrets here, I think we'd all be grateful.
Shall I go first, Kathy? Because I think that was quite a fun. When you were reading that out, Neil, I thought that you were going to say the power difference between older researchers and young children, but that's just my complex probably. We did a number of things. I think the creative activities that we did with the children definitely broke down power dynamics, and then they also were like creative activities that children wanted to try, that they suggested themselves. So there was a number of ways. So we developed the creative activities with children, but the other things that we did were we did group team building exercises that we joined in, so it was with children and us as researchers, and we also did icebreakers, and some of these activities like the icebreakers and things like that I actually took out into the community and in custodial settings. I managed to get some of those methodologies into custodial settings, and that's a whole another area that I could talk about. But we just used silly things like would you rathers, have you ever's. We used those range of creative materials that we shared with on the methodology. Yes, we did bribe them with pizza and sweets and drinks as well, didn't we, Kathy? And also we gave them vouchers to show how valuable their time was. So they were the things that we used, but I think as well as humour was great, actually having that relaxed atmosphere. We actually had a laugh together as well, so we laughed, not taking ourselves too seriously, but with those methods it did actually manage to break down those power relations. I'm not saying it did it completely. The other thing that we did as well with some of the children, they didn't want to speak in front of their peers, so we broke the group up. So we did some small one-to-one groups as well. So if they weren't comfortable working with a group and speaking in front of their peers, we just did small one-to-ones as well.
Sam asked in particular whether there was any research training or anything of research methods training that was given to the children involved.
We did a little bit. Because we wanted them to help us with some of the analysis as well, to see what themes were coming out. So it was part of what we were doing was trying to find out what works with a group like that and how to make that kind of group work. And so it was a bit sort of try something and see, bin it if it didn't work, try something else. And we got the children also to kind of feedback on what they felt was kind of effective in that kind of group situation as well, and what worked and what was rubbish, or don't do that again because that didn't work, or and that was helpful. But in terms of the research methods, we did a little bit of what do you think this is saying, and trying to kind of help them to interpret what something might mean. So we did some stuff based on pictures, on Lego models, and just sort of talked about how something might be interpreted, what that might mean, how that relates to what the person did who originally did it, and then we used some of a lot of the words actually from the children, the participant children, on sort of small sound bites to get them to sort of look at, okay, what does this mean? Is there a theme here? Is there something that you can recognize that is coming up from all of these different bits that we brought together? So we sort of did a bit as we went, I think. We didn't want to kind of outface them with things that they couldn't really understand the point of, because we were trying to do something and then teach them to do something and then actually did it at the same time. So it sort of helped them to learn as we went, as we indeed were learning as we went as well. I don't know whether that answers the question, Sam.
That's what I was going to say. It wasn't any sort of formal training.
No.
I think is the answer. That it wasn't formal. It just kind of oh, excuse me, everybody, I've got a frog in my throat. It kind of evolved within the groups themselves. And as I say, as Kathy said, we learn some of our mistakes. I think one of the mistakes that I will share with everybody one day, one session, we took too much data and it was just overwhelming. And they just couldn't engage with what we were trying to speak to them about, because I'd taken piles of data, which obviously is very nice for me. I love that kind of stuff, but obviously wasn't very engaging for the children we were working with.
Okay, moving on to what this means for practice, or putting things into practice. There's been a couple of warnings in the chat, one from Kelly Razor and one from Paul Thorpe, who's talked about how involving kids in within youth justice practice can be tokenistic, and of course the wording of the tenet 3, a child first, is about meaningful collaboration. So I guess there's the question about, how do you ensure that it's meaningful? And that goes alongside some other questions about specific elements to the practice, like somebody was asking about, if there's evidence of any good practice for making sort of meaningful input and collaboration into, so, referral orders, for instance. How can the panel activity, how can you make it meaningful? Any clues from these findings?
Well, shall I begin with that, just to say that I think that the way in which we sort of drew out our findings helps to show a pattern of what the children seem to indicate would be effective and would work, would then be meaningful to them. So, for example, if you leave out the last bit of the feedback loop, once you've got somebody's opinion, you never then get back to them as to why something was or wasn't used, then I think you start to lose effectiveness, because the children will just think next time, well, there's no point because nothing happened last time. And even if the answer was that they didn't, that wasn't used, if that feedback loop is closed and it's gone back to the child, this wasn't used because, but we're still interested in having your opinion into this process, because it's you got an important voice to have. So I think whether it has or whether it hasn't, it's really important to follow that up. And I think some of the more tokenistic approaches, if you like, leave out bits of it. They might do a bit of it, but they don't do the whole thing as a whole holistic process. And I think leaving out any bits of it, then you start to lose effectiveness all around, really. Anyone else want to add anything to that?
Anybody else?
I totally agree with what you're saying, Kathy. I think one of the other important things about the effective practice and actually putting it into practice, whether it be for a referral order or any of the orders, I think, which is relevant right quite across all agencies, is about the point that children made about the objectives of collaboration. So the objectives of whether it's a referral order or any other type of order. It should be what the child has said they would like to do. It should be forward focused, and it should be focused on their aspirations and their goals to actually help them not only collaborate and show that you have actually listened to what they are saying, and it's about that listening. So in terms of like, if you children were saying, oh, I've given me up and I've told people what I want, but they're not listening to me. So again, that tokenistic part. But so I think to show children that they have been part of the collaborative process is to ensure that interventions and support is about what they want to focus on, and to be part of that intervention, whatever it is.
So a couple of people within the in the chat have mentioned this one. So you've talked quite a lot in here about the importance of power and power balance and power dynamics. What about, in particular, racism and we know the importance of sort of the critical analysis there on power and racist power oppression and so on. And Mary Dover asked that question. So did Chloe Carter, about the aspects of systematic racism within a sector. Whether that was mentioned in relation to power, or is that a blocker to collaboration? How's that work? How's that dynamic?
Should I start with that? Because yes, it definitely was raised. I could write another paper on that, to be fair. It was raised quite consistently, so it is actually a theme. We haven't raised it as part of the findings in this particular project because our project wasn't about that, but we definitely have some findings from children, and they very strongly spoke about feeling that they had been there was racism within the system and the way that they had been treated.
Yeah, I think it was something that was, we couldn't miss it, really, could we, in terms of what the children were saying, especially in terms of the police. I'm afraid it was just a recurring theme again and again and again. So it was obviously something that was just absolutely kind of uppermost in their mind all the time. It seemed that was what their experience of youth justice actually was often their experience of police on the street, which was often very negative, and they were very quick to put that down to a kind of an ethnicity issue. But I think that they did that by saying, well, I don't see people like me on the street as police on the street. It's not, but they see the racial disparity in who are the police, and therefore they kind of see the system almost as stacked against them. I don't think we saw that in many other respects in terms of youth justice services or anything like that.
No, not in other settings. And I think some of the settings that the community settings that I went to, there was that representation across staff groups reflecting the communities. In terms of, I think, I don't want to preempt our recommendations, but I think in some of our draft recommendations we've got about recruitment, and they're being more reflective, or if it's not in our recommendations, it may be in the report that we're writing, do forgive me, but yeah, we've made that connection that as part of that recruitment of what children said, they do need to be reflecting the community, staff need to be reflecting the communities they're serving.
Well, we do need to move on to those recommendations in a moment, but just time for just a couple of quick questions, rapid fire questions and responses. Did the research include any child victims? Now, of course, we know there's overlap, a lot of overlap, but did it include child victims in particular? Was a question from Jane Goodwin. Oh, no, sorry, from Jackie Hamilton.
Not purposefully, no, but as you said, that there was that crossover, and so some children did speak to me about being victimised as well, but again, that wasn't part of our research sample.
Okay, and an observation was made by Anwar Husman, who said, well, we've noticed that, there seems to be a distinction between sort of participation and being involved and giving the voice, but then, the warnings that we heard from within your research about nothing being done about it, sort of not actually being actioned, and that feedback loop not being done as well. So anything that you wanted to say on that? Any observations or advice from findings for how to ensure that that's done more?
I'm not. To me, I can't really see the difficulty. If you've spoken to a child and you've listened to them properly and tried to act on what they've said to you, I think it's only courteous to go back and actually say to the child, we have done this because of what you have said, or we can't do this because, and give them the practical reasons or the reasons why something can't be done, not just to leave somebody hanging. Okay,
so apologies to those whose questions we haven't been able to deal with and with the time, but we do of course only have until 4 o'clock, so we need to move on to hear about the draft recommendations and then a chance to hear from people in relation to those 3 questions for practice. And just to recap on those very briefly for you to be thinking about those, how can you incorporate these research findings into your practice and agency? What would be the enablers and barriers to sort of collaboration and findings and understandings and actually building practice upon those understandings? And what support would you need to implement these in greater to a greater extent? So back to Kathy on the draft recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So we haven't picked out a number of things that we think would help to embed some of these things into practice. But I must say to begin with that, of course, we came across a lot of good practice when we talked to the children. They were able to identify, in different ways in different places, when this had worked really well. So this is certainly not to say that none of this already happens. Of course, there's lots of pockets of really good practice. Part of what we're looking at, I suppose, is about a kind of a more holistic, does the whole process really kind of look like this? And to see collaboration as being an enabler of the first 2 tenets of child first as well, because it's only when you properly collaborate with a child that you're able to then do those first 2 aspects, and without that third one you can struggle with the first 2. So it becomes kind of very important in actualizing actually the whole of child first across the whole of the youth justice space. And I say that because we're not just talking about youth justice services, we're talking about all of those agencies that work in that youth justice space, whoever they are. So if we're going to put collaboration as a key tenet of how youth justice works in England and Wales, then all of the stages of collaboration need to be followed, to ask them, to listen to what they say, to respect what they say that results in action, and then to use information both as a pre-asking and as an afterwards to close that loop, that feedback loop. And missing out any of those steps then will probably mean that it doesn't happen in any complete sense, and we will start to lose bits of that and lose its effectiveness. Children's own priorities need to inform interventions, and therefore all of it needs to be future focused. And like I said before, a lot of this is encapsulated through that fresh air idea. Actually, if we're not identifying what children's own priorities are, what children's own aspirations are, then the plan is not going to feel relevant to them, and co-producing it with them is going to lose meaning, because they will, if they do agree, it's agreeing to something that feels a bit more like a fait accompli. It needs to be properly reflecting what they have said and what they really think about what needs to happen, and on a whole service level as well. So looking at kind of involving children in decision making, having a place at that table, not necessarily even just asking them and then going away to where the decisions are made. It's where are children in that decision making process? Are they in at the point at which those decisions are made, or are they only asked and then the decision taken place at another table where they're not invited? So we've got the individual level. Are children actively involved in the decision making regarding everything that happens to them through their youth justice experience? Are they in that decision making process? at that organisational level, are they at the place at which these decisions are made? So for recruitment, are they on that panel that discusses who actually gets recruited? Do they have input, or is it a report that goes into something that somebody else then decides? So there are different ways in which children can be involved, but we also need to make it very meaningful and to show them what a difference their input makes. And of course, national planning of policy making. How much do we involve children in at the point at which those decisions are made, so that what they're saying can actually make a difference? And I think also it's important to be clear as well with some of these areas, is that some children really want to be involved in all of it. Some children want very little involvement. And part of what we need to do is also listen to how much they want to be involved, because yeah, it can't be something that's sort of forced on them. It needs to be something that they really want to be involved in as well. I think we've got another slide, haven't we, Andrea? So one of the things that we found, which was relating to power imbalance, really, was the idea of an environment that it allows power neutralization to happen. So this is about different aspects of the environment of whatever is taking place, whether that's in court, in the police station, in a youth justice service office, in an interview room. It's about the people in that room. Are they interested? Are they motivated by care, by really wanting the best for that child? Are they, we've also put in the idea of justice experience mentors can help children, because children really feel like they connect with them. They were very enthusiastic about that idea. But it's not just about the people in the room, it's about the physical environment. Is it comfortable, child friendly? Does the furniture allow for power neutralization? And thinking about how do we create basically a child first environment, which not something that's been particularly sort of pulled together into a concept, but I think we need to be looking at what is a child first environment that naturally, through the way it's designed, neutralizes power imbalance and facilitates children to actually say what they think. And how can we help them to communicate in a way that they're able to communicate? We know that children, a lot of the justice involved children, have problems with communication difficulties, with written inputs, and so we need to actually facilitate their taking part in other ways as well, because that's, if we don't, we take back the power as well. We need a consistency. So we were talking about, different aspects of consistency. It's about all levels of involvement, in terms of where a child is in that involvement. Have they got a referral order? Are they coming out of custody? Different levels at different places in their journey, different levels within the organisation, and also all agencies. So we have a number of different agencies that I think we can say have been slower to take up and understand child first. And I think that has really come out from some of the agencies where it's a bit more tricky, has really come out in some of the what the children were saying. So we feel that in order for this to really make a difference, what we found needs to inform the kind of the standards, the case management guidance, everything that goes out to help practitioners. And of course, a lot of that has been really moved forward in terms of the child first nature of it. I know with a lot of help from Neil, so that's really heartening to see. HMIP has been, I think, a difficulty in putting this in place, and I think it's although that's an improving picture, it still needs to be really brought on board to be singing off the same hymn sheet as the Youth Justice Board in this. So the inspections need to be looking at child first criteria and to really value that, rather than being sort of a bit split between different approaches, really. The workforce training needs to be really focused on how do we do this? What does this look like for you in your practice? And needs to really take that on board as an underlying aspect of all youth justice practice, because of course child first, if it's to be meaningful, needs to underlie everything that happens. It can't just be something that's bolted onto the end of something. It needs to be reflected in everything. And like I say, the design of youth justice spaces needs to be looked at. There's been just a tiny amount of work done elsewhere on youth court, and we know that there are some concessions in youth court, but yet we know that actually they're not very child first spaces, and all the power dynamics really are kind of maintained as they are. Police station, interview rooms, things like that, all these spaces where children experience justice, youth justice, actually need to be rethought and put into an understanding of what a child first environment can be. So this collaboration good practice actually, if it's to really make a difference, needs to be shared across the whole of the system with all agencies at all levels, because this will actually help to facilitate child first in all of its tenets. I think it's underpinning too many for it to be something that's seen as additional in some ways, and I think that it has had a bit of an additionality feel to it in the past. Neil.
Thank you very much, Kathy. So while people are considering the questions that are on the next slide, Andrea, and while people are considering those particular recommendations, there was a couple of questions that came in just towards the end of our last session that might be worth having a look at. They refer to specific groups of children and how whether collaboration needs to be tailored in some way, or whether there are any particular lessons in relation to those groups. So Sonia Lydia referred to children with speech and language communication difficulties in relation to collaboration. Shona Morrison referred to neurodiverse children. Are there any adaptations or anything that struck you? Did you have any children within the sample who talked about anything that you will have developed some lessons from or thoughts from?
Shall I start answering that? I mean, I interviewed these children, and it was clear that some of them did have problems and difficulties with communication, and there were some really simple things that helped. One of the things that was really straightforward was a squeezy stress ball. So in all the interviews that I did, I took a squeezy stress ball, and children found that it was great to just have that, to be doing something with their hands, as well as some of the other activities that I took in terms of I took in pens and sort of strange shaped cards and Lego and Play-Doh to some settings, and just to have something to do helped them engage, because they were concentrating on that activity, or they could fiddle with something, so that did definitely assist the interviews that I did with children.
Yeah, we had some good conversations in the PRG over making Lego creations, and it just allowed everyone to just sort of say what they were thinking. So actually you could have a big Lego creation session when you're wanting to see what children are thinking, really dig into, give them something else to do as well.
Great. So if people want to put their thoughts in the Q&A section, or to raise their hand and open up the mic in relation specifically to the questions that we have. We're not going to look at them one at a time. So in the round, we need to be thinking, people be thinking about what are the implications for putting these into these sort of ideas into practice, these findings into practice. What will be the barriers and enabling drivers and factors for implementation, and any support that's needed in order to implement these. So any thoughts, please either put them in the question and answer, or ask it out loud. We've then got about a quarter of an hour or so for this, if we do get those points through.
Can I just add something, Neil?
Please.
One of the things that we want to do for anyone who thinks it would be useful is put together a practitioner pack that will help to sort of work through some of these things, give reminders, good practice examples. We've got a number of ideas. We would be very open to what people think would be useful to be in that pack. So if you have an idea of something you think would be helpful, then we're very open to suggestions, because we want to make that as useful as possible.
Okay. Also, while we're we have a hand up from Chanel.
Hiya. I'm Chanel Ricketts. I work within Birmingham Youth Justice Service. So I'm currently the partnership and community lead, a strategic role, but I've worked on the ground 5 years now with the most high-risk prolific offenders in Birmingham, a lot of the gang nominals. So I think for me, in terms of my work now, it kind of echoes some of the work that I'm tapping into with the VRP. The Violence Reduction Partnership. I'm not sure if you would have probably heard about the My Tomorrow campaign that's going on. So it's all about kind of getting the young people's the children's voices, about their aspirations, what things are affecting them, the barriers and the challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis in terms of policies and procedures and their interactions with the Youth Justice Service, as well as the police. So I'm currently in the process of kind of getting some of those briefings within the Youth Justice Service to kind of brief our staff within our service to have those conversations with those young people about how to create their future, how to shape it, how to embrace it, and kind of embed that within our service. And I think it slots in nicely with the research that you've done. And I think to work collaboratively with us, I think for me in terms of that research pack, it would be really, really helpful to have kind of like different practical activities to help those staff that aren't necessarily innovative and creative, but to give them a bit of ideas as to what they can do with the young people. Equally, I'll be doing the work with the VRP as well. So that's just a thought from me.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Chanel. Carmen, got your hand up.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm an ex-cop for my sins, so I've only done 20 years, so I like to think I'm a little bit experienced. I've been a sergeant for 3 years. One of the questions I would like to ask you all is, how does the Police and Criminal Evidence Act going to help bringing the child first voice? Because its proceedings don't enable many people to talk. In fact, it's one of the few things you say to people. As soon as you've arrested them, you know, you do not have to say anything may harm your defence if you mention, when questioned, anything you've later given in court. And part of that caution, so for me as a cop, I would always make them wait, because I didn't want to, unless I got my body worn on, and you know, 99% of the time I did, the actual procedure says, actually, we need people to be quiet, because if they're talking without their solicitor, they'll get potentially confused, set themselves up, potentially damage their own defence, potentially give up stuff that could not harm them, but certainly damage their defence case, and their solicitor will just go absolutely bendy. So the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, as a rule, most cops will say, you know what, if you've got to talk about it, you need to say something later, not now, because now is not the right time. And that is a culture within every police officer in the whole of the country, and I suspect in Scotland as well. So if you're asking for the child to give their voice, I don't know how you're going to do it within the police service, because the general culture is, you know, you've been arrested for whatever crime on suspicion of, most of the time. Sometimes it's real, sometimes you've actually seen them with their drugs or with the knives or, you know, whatever. And that doesn't enable them to have a voice at any point, because they're basically brought into custody, told to shut up, everything is recorded, they're solicited, and if they've been arrested several times before, I can guarantee you now, it's keep your trap shut until absolutely necessary. And that is the culture that the legal system has given to them as well.
So any specific answers or points that you guys wanted to make to that? I mean, what I will say while you're thinking about that is there's a lot of work that's being done both in the YJB but also others, including myself, to translate Child First into the policing context. And there's, of course, we've recently had the Met's children's strategy, where it's just been some progress on that. And there's a report coming out, I think, maybe later this month or next month by MOPAC, where we've input, there's 100 recommendations in there for how Child First would work in relation to policing. But you raised some really good procedural points there, and so you know, I would have thought it's partly as to the particular situations and circumstances where different types of collaboration are appropriate, and different points, and how you work with and listen to children, not just under arrest. But were there any specific points from the research team?
Well, I was thinking about the police service as a whole unit, really, not just thinking of that point of arrest, but thinking about relationships that police can develop with kids on the street. And actually, if that was a much more sort of equal sort of development of knowing who they are. I think the PCSOs do this really well, actually, to get to know the kids on the street. Then there can be, it can break down some of the barriers there are between police and children, and some, you know, some of those misconceptions, I would say, that there are probably on both sides. So I think the aspect of relationship building is really important, because the police are so much more than just a point of arrest. They are sort of, you know, part of the community, aren't they? I'm not trying to fudge the issue.
No, I think your point's well taken, Carmen. I do know that the Youth Justice Board are very aware that the justice system potentially penalises children for staying quiet, and that is something that I know is being looked at, just to reassure you to some extent. Charmaine has got a question.
I work for the Liaison Diversion Service. I'm the Children and Young People's practitioner, and I'm based in police custody. It's just a small custody. There's just me as the Children and Young People's practitioner, and I'm just kind of thinking on a day-to-day basis how I think the police custody staff, I think they wonder why I'm there in the first place. So the idea of the children first, I think, I can't imagine how that's going to be received, and if there's any ideas about how to get that buy-in from the services, other services, including my own, in fact. But yeah, just I can imagine that conversation, just even mentioning Child First, even that those words would elicit a not a great response. So yeah, just any ideas you might have on how to get some buy-in from the police side of things, I guess.
Just to say again, a lot of work is being done on Child First policing, and I know the YJB. I'm speaking as if I'm still in the YJB. I'm not still a board member, but I will say the old habits die hard. The YJB, I know, has, you know, embracing and involving wider agencies beyond youth justice services and youth custody service, involving and embracing, and as you say, getting buy-in from those services, because we do know that, you know, the system is a system. It has to work, and everybody has to be brought into Child First, which essentially means being brought into the evidence base for what works for children and creating a safer community. That's what we're saying. We're saying people need to buy into the evidence base for what works. Did you have any particular point? I see you've taken yourself off mic, off mute. Andrea, did you have a?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I was going to concur with what people were saying. Children definitely did speak to me about that anomaly where they were told to keep quiet and not say anything, and so that they're struggling to have their voice heard in that environment. But then the other thing I was going to say is in terms of like that buy-in, and I think then again it's about sharing good practice, and there is some good practice out there. One that I came across very recently, I hope I'm going to get this right, is Cleveland Custody Suite, who have actually revamped their whole suite that's totally separate from the adult part of the station. So children have, it's a completely their own environment the children got when they go into the police station, and it has been developed collaboratively with children. So it's a very child-friendly environment. So there are pockets of good practice out there, and I think that if that can be shared, people can actually see the benefits of that for young people and staff that work there.
As Carmen and Charmaine both said, essentially what we're talking about here is culture change and culture and different professional cultures, and bringing everybody on board with this. It's a journey. It's a journey we've all been going through in relation to child first at policy and practice level. But it's what we have to do if we're going to make safer communities. We have to find a way to break through that. Marianne.
Oh yeah, so I just wanted to say really, so I was in practice, youth justice practice for 21 years, and in 2016 we moved our service for diversion out of court and harmful sexualised behaviour into the early help service, and started a child first practice from that point, and we started building on it. I actually left this year to take an opportunity to be an independent youth justice consultant, and I'm working with Centre for Justice Innovation. But so I do hear about different police forces and very different approaches. But I think, for us, when I was in service, I worked with Humberside, and I trained 160 police officers in diversion, and just them understanding what that meant and understanding that child psychology around it. We had some huge success, and recidivism rates were changed dramatically, and they avoided that arrest straight to the police station and the criminal experience, and they took them back to a place of safety, and then if it was safe to do so, and then brought in on a voluntary interview to make sure that they had representation and with a legal and appropriate adult. Some of the really minor ones were just taken home and then worked on a voluntary interview at home with the parents or carers. And so we saw a real change with the police force, but it is pockets. And I think with youth justice and realistically, we're all starting out child first, child centred, and saying, how we get it right. And then I think it's the police that will start to work with us and follow on. And I know obviously the Mets have made those changes, starting to make those changes, and also the MPCC have got their strategy 24 to 27 for children and young people. And I just think as that training becomes more available, I think we'll just see pockets of change, and then police forces influencing other police forces. So I just wanted to say that because I have seen it in the police.
Thanks, Marianne. That's a vision of hope there. Let's hope that is the case. And I agree. I think there's momentum there. I really do think there is, that's needed for culture change, and that point about culture change is being made in the comments as well. Jade Goodwin's made the point about needing changes in culture and how to bring that about. We've got the repeated theme of needing everybody to be on board with this. Mark Hill made the point about ensuring that police, courts, children's services, education, HMIP all have a key role in this, being on board. Now, there's a bit of a challenge from someone and a good challenge from Jackie Hamilton in the comments, who's and it's one we've heard in various forms over the years, but is there a risk really that focusing on the offender the child as an offender, their aspirations. Is there a risk that those aspirations include more power over the child victims, and the risk that needs to be assessed with the child victims' contribution included? I mean, how do you balance? How do you get collaboration? How do you get the voice of someone who's offended to ensure that that's in balance with victims? Is there a balance to be struck? Are they in competition? Is there a conflict there?
I would actually say I think there's a bit of a conflict of interest there, and I think that it's important for both. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and it's almost as if it's pitched, well, either the child who offends has their voice, or it's the child who's the victim has their voice heard, and it can't be both. And I think that we ran into problems when we created victim liaison officers that are part of the youth offending team, part of that youth justice team, and therefore we get both sides of it, if you like, being addressed through the same agency. And I just don't think that's necessarily the right way to go. I think that there should be a different agency to deal with children who are victims, that their needs absolutely need to be prioritized for them. But in order to effectively address a child's offending, unless we do it in this way, we found it's not been very effective. So in order to stop future offending and therefore avoid further victimization of people, then doing this approach is actually the evidence is suggesting this is more effective in doing that. So I don't think it's an either or, and I don't think it's necessarily bringing those two things together. I don't see why that would have to necessarily be the case. I think it's both need that good level of understanding and involvement, and to be collaborating in what happens to them through the system. And we neglect either at our peril, really.
So just a couple of minutes before we go into the sort of synthesis, last 10 minutes of this webinar. So just to pick up on a couple of other points, I wanted to mention something that Rob Street has quite correctly pointed out, which is that there's also some exciting work going on policing and child first by Vicky Kemp, Miranda Bevan and team, looking at particularly child first in relation to children in police custody, and the custody setting was something that was mentioned in particular in one of the comments we heard, or a couple of comments that we heard earlier. Something was as mentioned as one of the sort of barriers in the chat, which is not necessarily having a sort of a proper base or forum that's appropriate within youth justice teams for children to attend, one that neutralizes the power dynamics. I don't know whether Shona, when she mentioned that, was talking in relation to sort of strategy or practice, but one thing that I have noticed certainly, and given recommendations on in the past, is, for instance, in DTO meetings in custody, a lot of in the past, a lot of pressure there's been to include the children within those meetings with a lot of other sort of practitioners, and it almost been, in ones I've observed, it's almost like the practitioners are sort of almost turning and trying to hold the child to account, and it doesn't actually turn into holding the practitioners to account. Now, I know the case management guidance, the latest case management guidance, varies on that now. It's changed, it's moved things on from that. But whether in practice or whether we're talking about strategy formation, how do you ensure that actually it's meaningful, because that the power dynamic is balanced there when you're dealing with professionals and children? How do you manage that? You've heard a lot about the power dynamic. How can you manage that? What sort of ways?
Right. I think one of the areas is looking at the space in which it happens, and I think that's important, and maybe undervalued, because of course, well, in business, they talk about different levels of seating and things that can make people feel more or less powerful. So it's looking at that space really carefully and creating a space that works and that doesn't pick anybody out or doesn't kind of make a child feel disadvantaged in any way. And so I think it just needs first of all, it needs to be acknowledged. And I think sometimes we don't acknowledge these things. We have to acknowledge it first that it exists. And then we can start to look at, okay, how can we make this an even playing field for everybody? How can we take away that disparity between the power in the room? Because actually that's not helping anybody. It's not helping us come to a better conclusion or a better decision. So yeah, I think sort of acknowledging it is actually the first step, and that's often not done.
Can I add to that, please, Neil? Definitely, I think it needs to be acknowledged because it isn't. But when it is acknowledged, I think it needs to be children that actually get involved in that conversation. What is the space that they want? How, from their perspective, how do they think that those power dynamics are going to be broken down? Because we had those conversations in the PRG about, we acknowledged it. We didn't think it wasn't the elephant in the room. We knew that, that we were in a powerful situation because we were adults. I mean, obviously we weren't part of their service, but we were still adults that they didn't know. So it isn't just ignoring it, acknowledge it, make sure that, that the child is aware, that the adult is aware that that is going on, and then ask that child or children to actually be part of consultation about how would they want that space to look? Well, how would it be comfortable for them? And I think that might be different in different settings.
Right, one final quick question from Peter Spearman. I know you've had your hand up for some time. You're probably suffering from lactic acid. So if you want to quickly have your question, Peter.
It's not so much a question. It was just 2 points. The first one is the Yacht Talk toolkit on how to work with children that's been around for a number of years. The whole point, section 1 of 6 sections, talks about the power imbalance, and we train that to all the staff on Birmingham Practice and Performance Manager. So we train out and we directly talk about the power imbalance to all staff during prevention and diversion assessments and Asset Plus assessments and in delivery of interventions. It is then that I ran an SCH for 9 years, and I'm well aware of the power imbalance both in secure and out of secure. The second thing I wanted to say in answer to your question was that when we did collaboration with 22 young people, the last collaboration and participation with them to gain their voice on 10 different questions about our service, we also recorded their voice with their consent, and we made an 8-minute video to play back to our management board and all of our other staff as well. So instead of as adults interpreting what children were saying, we directly played back what their answers were and what their views were, and gave them freedom to say, you're going to be speaking to a few hundred people, what would you like to say? So that we didn't misinterpret anything that was being said, and so that we can share that. And then we went back to them to say what the results were as a result of that. So I just thought I'd share both of those
Peter.
Points.
That's really helpful. I'm going to move straight to Louise now. Louise Shorter, for your summing up. If Louise, you are still with us?
Of course, I'm still with you. Summing up like a judge would do at a trial. Well, I'm not going to go on. I'm not going to repeat everything back, because obviously you're all here and we've all heard it, and I'm sure we all need a loo break by now. But I just really want to thank all of the presenters for the depth of this work. I think that the fact we're all here because we're all really serious about making our communities safe, and it's clear that there is really significant learning that we can take away from this research that is going to help us in that mission to keep our community safe, and giving our children the best possible futures. I think there are some key elements that came out for me. I think the one quote that I will really take away from all of this was the one about respect that came from the girl who said, when she explained what respect was, she said, it just means treating me as you would your own children, your own child. And I think that is so powerful, because it's a word that can sort of take on extra significance, and actually that's all it means, and that's what these children are asking us to do. I've heard everything that people have said about the learning from different agencies, and we are doing significant work, as Neil has already said, at the YJB and engaging with different agencies. And it's, you know, it is something that we just need to keep on pushing forward on. And I think it very much includes, for me, legal professionals as well as policing, that which we spoke about quite a bit. Because as people pointed out, you know, that we have to be consistent with children about what is going to be in their best interests. And so for me, that includes legal professionals who I have a lot of dealings with in other areas of my professional life. So I think we all need to make sure that we are really pushing forward on these messages and sharing this really good, sensible, practical, you know, sort of suggestions of what we can do and how we can really make a difference to children in getting them to really collaborate and own the decisions and really participate in the decisions for their brighter futures. So just fantastic learning on all of that, and I really want to thank these researchers for their hard work and sharing all of their findings with us, and also of course to the Nuffield Foundation for funding this research in the first place. Neil's going to tell us in a moment about when the research is going to be published, so please look out for that, and please really do share with passion the good learning here, because we can get there together if we all stick together and keep trying to share this good practice. There are other bits of child first research that we're doing at the Youth Justice Board. We have a self-assessment toolkit, which you'll find on the resource hub, which is not something you need to report back to us on. It's there as a device for you to be able to really sort of test your own organisations and say, where are we? How are we doing with all of the good knowledge there is out there now, all of the evidence there is out there on what is going to make for better futures for children and safer communities. So please do use that self-assessment toolkit. And we also are really doing another piece of research, which is ongoing at the moment, which is about operationalising Child First. That's across all 4 of the tenants. We've done the sort of survey stage. It's a very broad survey, which is really about getting the voices and experiences of children and practitioners. We've completed the survey part of it. We are then going to do a much deeper dive on some of the challenges to embedding Child First working. So please look out for that. That will be published next year. We're also doing quite a lot of work within the Youth Justice Board, within our Youth Advisory Network, which is ensuring that the voices of children are really heard. And that's something you're going to be hearing much more of when we come to our Leaders Summit next year. What else do I need to tell you? You know, the webinar, all of this recording is going to be on our YouTube channel and also on the Resource Hub. And the Slido and the Q&A will be kept open for a bit. So if there are more points or questions that you want to feed back to us, then please do so. And we will put together a sort of sheet of FAQs and answers that are published so that you'll be able to see more answers that come back if we didn't have a chance to get to them today. But thank you all very much for being here with us, and thank you especially to the researchers for your fantastic work. Back to you, Neil.
Thanks, Louise. So the report is out in about a month's time, and I just wanted to draw your attention to what I think are probably the 2 major contributions. I think that of how this report moves us forward from what I've seen so far, and I haven't read the report because it's still in draft form. I think the first thing that's really come through in this webinar and in the report is just how much the other tenets rely on collaboration with children, and how if you're going to get the good practices we know through the other tenets, that's absolutely essential. So if you're going to understand the way a child sees themselves and to develop their pro-social identity, you have to collaborate with them in order to do that. Co-creation, actually, in order to work with them and work to their priorities, work to who they can see themselves in the future, and to guide that as well. And that, you know, collaboration is not something that just happens by accident. It's actually something that needs to be really thought about and deliberately done. And the second major contribution, I think, from this project is it's underlined what we kind of know, because we see it in different bits of research, but it's absolutely essential to realize it in this context, and that's the importance of power and the power dynamic that's involved. And it was said very clearly by the children that collaboration means listening, respecting views, being fully informed. Now, being fully informed is really about control. That feedback loop is about not, you know, about them still being in control of their lives. We understand how power dynamics can get in the way. We've heard about racism, for instance, and getting in the way. We understand about the importance of positive relationships and about balancing that power, about neutralizing disengaging power imbalances to ensure children's engagement. And it takes me back to some research that I was involved with about 20 years ago, which was about trying to involve parents more in parenting support. And I remember a quote that stuck with me all this time from a parent who said, support means that you're still in charge, you're not handing over. Now, in that case, they meant handing over the children or handing over control. Now, we're not saying that the children involved in youth justice need to be in charge of the process. And we're not talking about responsibilizing the child as well. What we're talking is about allowing that child to have agency in their future. It's about ensuring that effective youth justice is there. And effective youth justice is not something that can be done to a child. I think we used to think that, you know, you send them on an intervention, you do youth justice to. You can't do youth justice to a child. And of course, you know, effective youth justice professionals have understood that all along. It's something that has to be done together if it's relevant, or going to be seen as relevant to the child, if they're going to be engaged, if they're going to see it as relevant to their future. That's what we need for positive child outcomes. That's what we need for safer communities. And I think that really is spoken very loudly in this research. So thank you very much to the researchers that we've heard from today, from Stephen, Kathy, Andrea. Thank you very much, Nuffield Foundation, for the support. Thank you to Louise and the Youth Justice Board, and to the Youth Justice Board staff who hosted this session today. And thank you to everyone for coming along and participating and really being involved in the webinar today.